All right. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Man Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan, the co-founder of Omni, and today I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Andy, who's the co-founder and CRO at Tourial. We've actually known each other for quite some time. I think we got connected, back really like 3 or 4 years ago, randomly. And like he reaches out to me and he says, "Hey, man, starting this company called Tourial. Want to get some feedback on it." And we had a call, and I honestly hadn't really done one of those because sometimes people reach out for these types of things, but it was a good conversation. And I guess now, 3 years or something later, it seems like, or maybe it was less. I don't know. It seems like it was a while ago. Now we're chatting, right?
Yeah, I think it was 2 years ago. That's
Yeah.
funny. I was thinking about that last night too, like how we actually came to meet. I
Yeah.
I was like reaching
Right.
out to a bunch of people on LinkedIn just asking for product feedback. I don't know how
Yep.
I came across
No
you,
clue.
but
Yeah.
I did, and I reached out to you, and you were one of the few to respond and be like, "Yeah, I'll help you out."
Yeah.
And
Good.
I
It's just
remember
my great
you.
looks, my hair,
Yeah,
face.
that's
It's just
right.
like, oh man, that guy's got to have some good ideas. He must have a
Yeah.
perspective on this.
I will say you had a great perspective because you actually grilled me quite a bit with the
Did
product.
I? Man, I don't even remember what I said. Jeez.
I mean, you were just honest. You were just honest. You're kind of like, so like, what is the problem that you're solving for? And I was just like, I was on my own trying to figure this out. I didn't really know how to do
Yeah.
discovery or anything like
Right.
that. And you're like, yeah, like, what are you like really solving for? Who's this for? What's this working? I was just like, uh, well, like
Yeah.
marketing and making tour. And I don't know what I said, but
Right.
yeah, it
Right.
was, it
Oh, that's
was really
funny.
helpful. Yeah, no,
That's funny.
it's
Well,
good
good stuff.
practice.
Well, yeah, here we are. Yeah, good practice. Exactly. And clearly, you guys have done really well. So, well, cool. Where I always start these things, man, is just as we kind of go through some of your thoughts and perspectives, we're going to be talking a little about obviously Toriel, but then more broadly speaking, like the industry at large. But just a little bit about like what Toriel does at a high level, and then ultimately like who you guys are selling to.
Yeah, yeah, quick one sentence. Basically what we do is we help software companies drive more awareness and demand for their product through
Hmm.
interactive, self-guided demos, right? That are going
Hmm.
to drive more conversions, more pipeline, and ultimately revenue for the business. Um,
Hmm.
we go after we support SaaS companies, really any software-enabled companies. We've got POS
Hmm.
systems. We've got some non-SaaS companies that are like native
Hmm.
software companies, where you download it on your computer. So
Exactly.
yeah, the software, the tech-enabled companies, and we really focus on product marketing and demand gen. That's kind of the interesting facet about our target market is that we're like right at the crossroads of product marketing and demand gen, which is
Hmm.
it's a blessing and a curse because you have to get multiple stakeholders and buy-in, but it's also very
Yep.
exciting that we're building something that is actually bringing product marketing to demand gen and vice
Right.
versa, right? So it's been really cool. And people use the tool a lot for outbound sales enablement, that sort of thing,
Hmm.
but ultimately anyone that's trying to drive more demand and awareness for their product and highlight their product's value right through these interactive experiences is that's who we serve.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
Yeah, yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, I think the thing that always stands out to me is that there's still so much friction in the buyer journey, and that you guys have really decided to kind of focus on. All right, hey guys, like at the end of the day, like why don't we just actually show people the benefits of what our product does, very simply,
Hmm.
and why don't we
Hmm.
give them a little bit of a story or a narrative to follow through, which I think is great because when you look at the last 5-10 years, or even seems like less, but potentially more,
Yeah.
there's still so many companies that are still following a very restrictive path in terms of holding back information about their product, not having transparent pricing, using confusing language on their website. I mean, lots of different things, long gated forms, long forms in general on their website. So there's all these things that
Yeah.
like, create a friction. But I mean, in terms of like the journey for you guys, I mean, just maybe speak a little bit more broadly, and then we can kind of jump into some things tutorial wise. But
Yeah.
are there some things like you guys are seeing, like, or you personally, within, how things have changed in terms of how buyers want to buy and like their expectations for like when they get to a SaaS or a tech-based website? Like, what are their expectations and what do SaaS companies need to be doing as it
Yeah.
relates to maybe what they have been doing for like the last 5-10 years?
Yeah. It's interesting because like I don't think the buyer's journey changes a lot, but the buyer hasn't really changed. It's the industry that's just kind of catching up with the buyer's
Mm.
desires, right? And resetting those
I like that.
expectations, right?
Yeah.
Every buyer uh, under the sun wants to ultimately self-serve and get information when they want to get information, right? So that's kind of how I sum up the buyer's journey in general, but over the last 5 to 10 years or so, it's becoming so much more self-service, right? And
Mm-hmm.
with B2B, what I've always seen is that B2B always follows B2C, right? The trends
Mm-hmm.
that are happening in B2C, that's where you can prove out what works, what doesn't work, because it's so much harder to measure and test things in B2B that if
Mm-hmm.
something's working in B2C, it's going to trickle down into B2B and be adopted widely there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you see so much of the B2C journey right now becoming more self-serve, right? You've got
Right.
self-checkout at grocery stores. You've got virtual tours of homes and apartments. Even
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of the fast food and fast casual restaurants are starting to have like their own self-order kiosks, right?
Yep.
Everything in the B2C is slowly becoming more
Mm.
self-serve, and it's working. It's not stopping. So B2B is like, okay, we need to start doing more self-service stuff, right? And
Yeah.
that's where you see this whole product-led movement unfolding, right? This
Yep.
PLG wave that's taking over is showing is the B2B world's version of adopting this self-serve capability.
Mm-hmm.
And buyers are starting to expect that more and more with B2B, especially like as the next generation of buyers enter the
Yeah.
software industry. You got like these millennials who their entire life, everything's been very self-service. They haven't had to go through
Yep.
this very people-heavy process. And so they get into the real world. We get into the real world and we're like, well, we want to self-serve. We want to do all this stuff on our own.
Yep.
So B2B companies have to very much adapt to it. And it's hard, right? It's very hard to adapt to these things overnight because these are big industry
Mm-hmm.
shifts that are happening. But like at a really high level, like it's, you know, it's not rocket science. It's
Mm-hmm.
not complicated with what's actually happening. It's
Yeah.
just becoming more buyer focused, right? It's
Well,
about
no,
the
I think,
buyer.
yeah, no, I think you said it well because it's like, I mean, the common examples everyone likes to use is Amazon at the end of the day. And you look
Yeah.
at, all right, B2C is setting the trend. So at one point, it was potentially more difficult to buy just a regular product online. Now it's made a lot easier. Those expectations have now been raised. So now we're used to buying products all the time without any friction really at all. You can literally just click a button and you're done.
Yeah.
Right. So now
Yeah.
everyone's saying, all right, well, now my expectations are that everything needs to be that way for B2B. And why isn't it? Man, this is frustrating as hell. Like, why
Yeah.
can't I just go see this thing,
Yeah.
go buy it, go understand the price? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
walking into, I mean, imagine walking into a supermarket and there was no pricing on anything. And it
Yeah.
said, wait, you'll have to talk to a store manager about
Contact a
that
manager.
can of
Yeah.
soup. Yeah, exactly. Be
No,
like,
you have to talk to somebody below the manager first to find
right,
out,
right.
what are you trying to cook? What are you trying
Sure,
to actually do with this food?
exactly.
And then I will send you over to our store manager who will
Totally.
actually sell it to you.
And
I
then
think
some days later, maybe you figure that out, right? It's like
exactly. Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah,
I mean, like, so, I mean,
exactly.
for me, like, and I have a kind of a viewpoint on this, so I'll let you kind of start it, and we can riff back and forth. But I mean, what's the reason for that? Like, why? Why are they either slow to kind of adopt some of these things? Because you just said to yourself, like, there's just some issues in terms of taking a company that maybe has had an existing model or existing,
Yeah.
GTM motion, and then changing that and saying, oh wait, now we're going to do things completely different. But are there some reasons like why they're creating friction, or is it just that it's just difficult to change once you've already gone down that road? Like, what's the reason?
Yeah, I think there are a few reasons. I mean, number one is even though something is full of friction, it's the only way they know, right? Like marketers are taught a certain way to market. So this is how we do it, right? This is the old way. It's the current way. Most people aren't going to be those innovative thinkers to think about ways to how to remove friction, right? So like the easy answer to that is it's the only way they know. Um,
Yep.
the more realistic answers also are like the seller, the company, you know, we want to have as much information as possible about the buyer, right? So we add in a bunch of a bunch of fields to our lead forms. We have long discovery calls so we can extract as much information as possible, put it into our CRM. And collecting information is like obviously very important to both parties, but very few, I think, have really cracked the code on how to like get all the information necessary from both parties to like drive a deal across the finish line.
Right.
So yeah, number one is just people just want as much information as possible, right? The other thing I think is like people don't realize how full of friction it actually is, right? So like very rarely does a buyer tell a seller, hey, your website is really hard to get through, or you have too many fields
Yeah, they just
in your
leave. They're
form.
like, all right, I'm out of
Exactly.
here. Like
Yeah.
this, I don't understand it. I don't get it.
And you can look
Yeah.
at bounce rates and all that stuff and look at your GA data and add Hotjar and full
Mm-hmm.
story. You know, those help tremendously with like understanding the top funnel buyer's journey. But like after that, you know, you're really it's a people process, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
becomes a sales process, owning and understanding where those friction points are. And that's really hard because, you know,
Mm-hmm.
marketing is arguably the most interested in understanding that friction. And
Sure.
so there creates that disconnect. So I think, you know, number two is they just don't realize how much friction is really there, right?
Mm.
And then I think, you know, the last thing is to remove friction is a lot of effort, right? The simpler and easier something is, the more harder and complex it is on the back end, right? You think about Amazon, take it back to there. Like they make it so easy for the consumer, but you know, like on the back end,
Oh
it
yeah.
is just a complex, insane
Mm-hmm.
machine running that entire empire.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more simple something is, the more complex it is on the back end. And
Mm-hmm.
PLG is the same way, right? PLG to go product led to be self-serve is you know, it is a total business strategy. And for you to go sales led to product led and all that sort of stuff, like it's very expensive, right? I mean, you got to
Yeah.
hire engineers, you got to change your entire motion, your entire operational process. So to actually,
Mm-hmm.
you know, go PLG is very expensive and it's a lot of work.
So it's not just
Um,
putting the button that says start now or start
right?
free
Yeah.
trial. It's not that easy. I mean, I've been
Yeah.
on some calls where like, yeah, no, we're thinking about this PLG thing. Yeah, we're going to start just by putting a button on our website that says start and then, go from there. I'm like, there's going to
Uh,
be a rude awakening coming very, very
Yes,
soon.
I know. I've even talked to a
you
few
know?
people in the past where they're like, yeah, we tried to go product led, we tried to go self serve, and it just didn't work. And then they explained what they did, and it was very similar to that. And they like didn't set up any of their infrastructure, any of their product analytics,
Yeah,
any of their like
exactly.
operational flows to actually understand what it to actually analyze that strategy. So yeah, I found that very interesting. But the other thing too is like
Yeah.
it's risky, right? It's kind of risky to try and remove friction. Again, that's why like B2C is always kind of the gold standard for what
Mm-hmm.
works, and then it translates down to B2B. Um,
Yep.
it's really because you know like if you think about it's hard to make big changes to a website like messaging updates or lead capture strategies because you know take like paid search for example in B2B. It's typically going to be very low volume. So like changing
Mm-hmm.
messaging, changing ads, changing landing pages, like even using tools like you know VWO or Google Optimize and A/B testing and creating the
Mm-hmm.
perfect experiment, there just may not be enough data to ever justify a
Exactly.
significant result and
Mm-hmm.
get to the point where you're like, okay, this is working and this is not working. So like you really have to go with your
Exactly.
gut, right? B2B
Exactly.
is a lot about going with your gut and just being a good you know marketer, salesperson, strategist. And so if you have to go with your gut since it's risky to try and remove friction, people just opt not to do it and keep
Yeah.
what they're doing in place. You know, you know, the whole if it's not broke, don't fix it. It might be broke, but you might not know that it's broke. And you might
Yep.
just
I
not
like
know
that.
that there's so much more opportunity out there. Right. And so
Right.
you try all these other things that you can measure and that you can try. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's
I
kind of
think
how I'm thinking about it.
no, I think you nailed it. I totally agree. I think the only thing I'd add is I think there's an element of control always with these things too, is that
Mm-hmm.
the companies want more control. So when you remove gates, when you show more information about your product, there's a sense of, all right, well, I'm not in control now because most of what, B2B companies have done for years is, hey, I need to grab the information, get the email address, move it through some type of inbound email nurture, then I need to pass it to an SDR after it's lead scored and move through that funnel. So you start opening up gates, you start putting transparent pricing on things when that was actually, I mean, see or get a quote was a CTA for a while. I think that started to go away a lot now, but there's still a lot of companies that are still using that as a way to drive more leads. And the fear is,
Mm-hmm.
hey, if I put
Mm-hmm.
my pricing on my website, or if I show more of my product, well, then I'm not going to get as many demos. I'm not going to get as many people asking like, about my pricing or anything like that. And I can't control the conversation. So I think a lot of this is to me just control, and it's letting
Yeah.
go of that a little bit and saying, hey, wait a minute. if we actually tell people our pricing, make it really easy to understand what we do, we show them our product, let them take tours and play around with it or whatever, whether it's PLG or sales led motion,
Yeah.
then they're going to know a lot better, like if this is a good tool for them. And then it's
Yeah.
also going to weed out the people that potentially aren't, which is also
Exactly.
good, right? Because then you're
Yeah.
not talking to a whole bunch of people that are like, yeah, no, I thought it was this, but this is definitely not what I want. Well, that's
Yeah.
then now 30 minutes, an hour, or whatever prep time did your SDR, your AE spent prepping for that call. Now you've got someone that's qualified, ready to buy. They're like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I need, so on and
Yeah.
so forth. So I think
Yeah.
there's this control dynamic that we struggle with as well.
Yeah. It's funny. That's kind of a question that is sits in the back of people's mind, I think, is like, if you show them too much, is that going to decrease the demos that we get, right? Like what's the balance? Um,
Yeah,
and like, say you have a qualified buyer that hits the website, right? When when did we decide that giving them too much information is a bad thing, right? Like, since when is
right,
that actually
exactly.
a detractor? That's crazy to me.
Yeah,
I'm a
agreed, agreed.
huge proponent for giving buyers all the product information they could possibly need or want to make a buying decision.
Yeah,
Um, like, sure, maybe a buyer will get on a demo with an AE and say, I already have a good idea of what you do. Let's talk about
yep,
price. Like, that would be an absolute delight for an
yep,
AE, right? Last time I checked. Um,
totally.
so yeah, like maybe, there might be fewer in-depth demos, right? Where people really have to spend a lot of time and a lot of brain power going through the ins and outs of their
Yep,
product. But it's like more qualified opportunities, right? Quicker sales cycles, more revenue. Like, that's not a bad thing, right? So
exactly.
it's definitely a balance, but and then it's just like you said, like there's nothing wrong with a buyer learning about your product and realizing it doesn't make sense for them, right? Like, how many calls do SDRs or AEs have in the first 5-10 minutes? They're like, why is
Yep,
this 30 or 45 minutes blocked on my calendar? This person is not even close to qualified, right? So
right.
that's a good thing if you can save a lot of time in a frustrated AE by giving them quality information about your product where they disqualify themselves, right? That's a
Exactly.
good thing.
Exactly. I mean, I think what you said spot on. I mean, ultimately, like there are probably some easy things. I think I go back to your point about, hey, it's actually when something's really simple, sometimes there's a lot of back end stuff that makes it hard. But would you say that there are maybe some things that just make it a little bit easier for someone to, you know, understand very quickly what you do and reduce a little bit of friction on your website? Are there some like quick kind of like hacky things to that? Or is it all kind of very difficult and requires more thought process in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think historically it's always been about case studies and thought leadership content. Those are all still very, very relevant, right? Those are so very, very
Mm-hmm.
important for building trust um, in the consumer, in the buyer quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Testimonials, all that sort of stuff. I think as far as like really showing the product, how it works, what it does,
Yeah.
um, three or four things that I can think of are obviously live demos, right?
Yep.
Less on the website, right? The website is kind of a means to getting them to the live demo. But as far as actually, really demonstrating how your product works, I think live demos are
Probably the
obviously
easiest.
excellent. Yeah, excellent at it.
Yeah.
There's product videos, right? People are doing product videos left and right now. There's really two types of product videos. There's the explainer video, which ironically doesn't really show the product that much half the time. It's just kind of a little bit of a fluffy value prop production video with a nice little jingle in the background, which is good for like very top funnel marketing, sending it out in social media campaigns and just getting some really quick awareness, saying, hey, you've got a problem, we've got a solution. Then there's a lot
Yep.
more to accomplish after that. Um,
Totally.
Started to see more like companies building out like almost demo sandboxes of
Yeah.
their product, not the actual product itself, but just kind of like
Mm-hmm.
really high quality sandboxes that people can access and click around and explore.
Yep.
Sometimes it's the actual product, sometimes it isn't. But those have been pretty solid, I think, at kind of showing and explaining a little bit about what the product does. And then obviously there's, being a little biased, there's the self-guided
All
demos,
good.
right? There's
Mm-hmm.
the tours, right? There's actually giving somebody a glimpse into the product's full capabilities, full functionality, how it actually works
Mm.
for them now and in the future.
Hmm.
Those are the types of things that drive a lot of interest and demand and get people to want to take that demo, right? To go into that, to start that journey and accelerate that journey. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, those are the, I mean, I think
Agreed.
those are,
Yeah, I
yeah.
think the only thing I'd add to it, I mean, I think this can be a difficult thing depending on what you've got set up on a MarTech background, like
Yeah.
your tech stack. But reducing form fills is an easy one to
Yeah.
increase conversion rate,
Oh,
reduce
yeah.
friction. Now, of course, again, depending on what workflows you have, that could be disruptive. So obviously, for companies that are pulling in certain data
That's
attributes, and those are
always the thing. Yeah.
exactly. So that sometimes cannot be like that easy. Oh yeah, just remove the form fill. Are you kidding me? Like we've got 32 things, but for some folks, depending on the
Yeah.
stage of company you're at, that can be pretty straightforward. Pricing to me should be easier. I know that everyone makes it more complicated, but I think that there's always going to be maybe a custom version of your pricing, and that's okay. You can always
Yeah.
have that custom thing where people have to talk to you, but
Yeah.
there should be a way to easily just kind of pull out your core benefits and associate a price to that based upon the value people are seeing for the product or whether it's cost basis, whatever way you set that up. To me, that maybe isn't like in a day, but within a few weeks or some months, you should be able to get something where it's like, hey, at least we've got a V1 of here's generally where we start. If you really want something else, like talk to our sales team. And like, I think
Yeah.
that's fine to me. And that I think makes it a lot easier. And then
Yeah.
the last thing that's pretty easy to me is just like for example headlines and just general copy on the website is just looking at each paragraph and seeing if you can remove a sentence or two because the
Hmm.
less copy that's on your website the better.
Yeah.
You don't need a lot of copy
Yeah.
to sell it. Ultimately the less is
Yeah.
more, but
Yeah.
sometimes that does take some thought process. But doing little things like putting I want in front of a sentence saying like I want firmographic targeting on Facebook, right? And then you can take that, remove the I want, and then use that as a headline. So then it aligns a lot better with
Hmm.
what people ultimately want out of getting to your website and trying to understand what you do. So little things like that, I think, would be the only things I'd add. But yeah, some of them are definitely like the moving from like PLG and reducing friction. That ain't one you do overnight, right? It's not you don't
Yeah.
just put the start button here and then magically everything's better and everyone's happy. So there's
Yeah.
definitely a process.
Yeah. No, you're
Um,
absolutely right. You're absolutely right, man.
yeah.
I
Well,
might
cool.
have to, I
So
might take some of those. I might have to do the whole
yeah,
I want thing and kind of go through that process and see if that's a good
yeah,
exercise for our website.
it's super helpful. It's super helpful. So let's get into so like future of the demo. I know you guys clearly have a perspective on this. I think I'll just say a couple things to kind of kick it off and then get your thoughts on it. But obviously, traditionally, most B2B SaaS companies, especially that are sales led, their primary CTA is to get people to fill out a form, book a meeting on Calendly or Chili Piper or whatever, and ultimately take a meeting with an SDR to get passed off to an AE, so on and so forth. And eventually a demo happens somewhere in that flow. And like that's been the goal. But now, obviously, we've been talking a lot about maybe there still is a demo, maybe at some point, but the demo is actually maybe moving forward. And it's not that you need to wait to talk to sales. You actually have the demo right on your website and you can just start watching immediately. So I think it brings in a lot of questions of, well, is that a demo? Is it a demo when they actually talk to a sales rep? How do we measure that? Will that affect demo rates? I'm kind of jumping ahead of my outline here, but those are just kind of some thoughts here a little bit. But what are your thoughts? I mean, what do you guys typically say when like, hey, here's what's going to happen. Here's what the future of the demo is going to look like.
Yeah, that's a great question. You mentioned moving how the demo is kind of moving forward. I think the demo is moving up, right? If you think about the funnel,
Up.
you think
Uh-huh.
about the marketing funnel. I think it's moving up, right?
Yep.
We wait so long to show people and give people a demo. Some companies really got their stuff together and they're able to do hot transfers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, most aren't, right? Most people have to wait a few days or whatever the timeline is to actually see it. I think that the demo is being moved up, right?
Agreed.
So
Yep.
earlier, right away, right
Exactly.
now. But I think there's a very important distinction to make too when you talk about the demo in this
Mm-hmm.
kind of new age of software. So like there are actually, I feel like two types of demos, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
the live demo, right? The one with the sales rep, the one that we notoriously talk about. No, that's the live demo, right? But then now there are the self-guided demos, which are obviously a bit newer, and the market that we serve. But those are the ones that are meant to be experienced without a sales rep, right? So you put them on websites, promote them in paid media campaigns, use them in outbound, whatever, and basically drive that awareness, that demand for the product that then leads to the more in-depth live demo, right? So I think it's important to kind of distinct that there are two types of demos, right? There's the live and then there's the self-guided. And you can't really put a live demo at the very, very top of your funnel and use it because no one has the resources
Sure.
or people power to do that, right? So you create these self-guided demos. You put
Mm-hmm.
them across your marketing, across your sales motions, and allow companies to scale their demos, right? And acquire people so much faster into their funnel.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of new age of software has essentially kind of split the demo into two categories.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think very much is the future of the demo. And, that's not to say that the live demo is going anywhere, because it's not. I don't think that a world exists where you can truly, truly not have some sort of ability to give a live demo. Now, that's not to say that, there could be a world where the self-guided demo does take over the live demo in terms of its predominance. But that doesn't mean that a company shouldn't have the process or infrastructure set up to actually give live demos. As it becomes easier and more scalable and more known around how to build more of these self-guided versions, people will do it more. People will understand what works, what doesn't work. And that might, like I said, lead to a point where it's adopted and used more so than a live demo. I think we're pretty far away from that, but who knows?
Yep.
So yeah, that's
Do you think there's like a point in the journey where one like decides to go more self-guided versus actually hold the hand of a sales rep in terms of maturity? Let's say that like I don't know, I'm an early pre-seed company. I have maybe a few customers, but I'm still really learning, getting a lot of feedback. Do you think there's a time and a place for when you start adding this additional demo? And I like the way you split it there because you're right. It's like live demo, then self-guided. But is there a point in time where you're like, no, this is actually not the right time for you guys? Maybe wait, continue having good conversations with customers, and then once you get just a little bit further along, then put self-guided? Or do you think that's something you do kind of right from the get-go?
okay. So are you saying like do live demos as much as you possibly can early on in the company life cycle and then
Exactly.
introduce self-guided? Yeah, I mean, I
Is
think
there
that's a
is that
really
is that a
good
thing, or is that not a thing at all? I'm asking you. Maybe it's
I
not a
think
thing at
that's a
all
good
in your
point,
mind.
though, in terms of a good strategy that people can incorporate, because it is very important to talk to customers right now. There are a lot of companies out there that are just product led from the get go, and they've
Yep.
got their infrastructure set up to monitor
Hmm.
all the activity that's happening inside their app and get really good feedback from their customers. So I don't necessarily think that it's required or anything like that. I don't see it as often. I mean, everybody always diverts to, demos, demos, demos first and foremost right away. And I
Yeah.
do think that that's valuable, especially if you're like an early company and there's a small amount of people and maybe the founders are doing the sales and having those conversations. And you're also probably more
Yeah.
likely to close deals that way. But yeah,
Right.
it's an interesting strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I think I ask because every now and then we don't work with a lot of these companies that are pre-seed, but every now and then you'll get a company that's like really, really early, right? Their product is kind of coming along, but they're not
Yeah.
PLG, right? They're definitely coming
Yeah.
in as a sales-led motion. A lot of the reasons they want to still push people through kind of like a typical demo flow is because there's still some kinks they're working out with the product.
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't look as good as they want, and there's some things that don't work quite right, but it's kind of maybe delivering the core piece of value, and enough clients are getting some value from it.
Yeah.
So you can kind of hide those little issues in a sales conversation. Whereas if you just open it up, then those issues become really prevalent, which is why, if you're a PLG company, you got to have those things buttoned up from day
Hmm.
one. At least
Hmm.
get the core. I mean, make sure you got a smaller feature set, make sure those core things are really hammered out. Obviously, there's a bug here and there. That's always going to be the case with any product, but
Yeah.
so people really understand it. So I think that that's important. But going back to your point, so we got those two demos, but then there's still the explainer. Is that going away in your mind, or do you think we're going to just not do the animated explainer with the video stuff, or do you think that still has a case like you just said from a top of funnel perspective? What's your thought there?
Yeah, I don't think video's going anywhere. I mean, it's a different way to consume information, right? And everyone has different ways of learning, and videos are
Yeah.
still videos are still good. Yeah, I don't think videos are going anywhere. The fact that, you can create an explainer video, put it on social media, promote it, all that fun stuff.
Hmm.
I think it still has its place. That still does a good job at like really, really quickly explaining what the company does and how the product can solve your problem. Um, but that's 1% of the entire buyer's
Yeah.
journey, right? So I see a world where, people make like maybe a 30, 60-second explainer video, and that's the asset that they have, and then
Yeah.
everything else is demos, in my perfect
Right.
world.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like, I mean, I don't know, like the 1 minute, maybe I just haven't seen a lot of good ones recently or something,
Yeah,
but I feel
there's
like they're really good for probably investors or people like wanted to know kind of a general, big lofty vision type of thing. But maybe I'm just a practical asshole, and I'm just like, all right, I just want to see it. I want to play around with it. I want to kind of understand like what's the like I'm doing this now, right? And I think this is where the tours I think become so important. Like explain my situation. Like, what am I doing right now? Like, help me understand that because I need to figure out whatever I'm doing now. I need to somehow transition over what this new way of doing it is. So I need to like figure out and understand that very quickly. And I'm just a visual person, so like to see it in these animated things. I think they're better for maybe like either super top of funnel or definitely like used in investor decks and things like that, where you can just kind of quickly shoot a little 2 minute, like, oh yeah, I kind of get it, like current situation, problem, solution, results type of thing. But
yeah,
that's just my
yeah.
personal opinion. I'm a big fan of like the self-guided live
Hmm.
demos, and then I also like the sandbox idea as well too, where it's just like fill out the form and you're right inside the
Hmm.
product. Or sometimes you don't even fill out a form at all. You're just playing around and having
Yeah,
fun with the product,
yeah,
which is great.
yeah, I agree.
Um,
Yeah, videos, I mean, videos are one to many, right? Like you're speaking to an entirely huge audience.
yeah,
So it's a little bit more challenging that way. People can't really control their experience. And, the other thing too is like, there's so many video agencies and tools out there. Like
yep,
that, that entire ecosystem is not going to let video just kind of
no,
dissolve,
of course not.
and
No,
there's,
of course
again,
not.
they have their place. They absolutely do. But with software, there's a lot more in-depth way to communicate value, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I want to hit on something that move into something I know that I've heard from multiple different people when I talk to them about doing self-guided. But I think a lot of people fear that their competitors. So let's say, let me just give it a little bit of context. Let's say that I'm a sales-led motion B2B SaaS company, but I don't have really much of my product being shown on my website. Maybe I have a couple snapshots kind of here and there, but I don't do a lot of video. I might even
Hmm.
not have an explainer, things like that. I'm very much about like maybe good benefit messaging, a couple little snapshots here or there. That's it. Like that's kind of my go-to. So, and my primary motion is, of course, like we said, getting demos into the sales team, right? So they're going to fill a form and then get over to the sales team, and then
Yeah.
they're going to handle it from there. But I think that the risk that everyone feels is that, all right, well, I'm going to put this on here. Number one, maybe my competitors are going to see my product and they're going to steal stuff, right? They're going to copy my UI, they're going to steal my features, and I'm scared, right? Like these are legit things that I've heard from people. And then the other thing is they clearly we talked about the control issue right at the beginning of this, right? I think there's obviously a control thing of saying, well, now you got to be okay with the idea that tons of people are going to be getting into your product, and you might have some engagement metrics and things like that, but you're not going to know who they are. You're not going to know what they're doing and things of that nature, so that you can actually follow up with them. And then the last biggest one is demos may fall. Maybe our demos fall. We were doing 50 last month. We implemented this. Maybe they're going to fall because now people can just see it. They don't need to fill out a form and talk to us about it. So that's a lot to unpack. Clearly, you can pick one of those, obviously, if you want. But what's your thought on that? Like, is that a valid concern? And do you guys hear that like a Tourial a lot?
Yeah. I mean, well, speaking to the competitive stuff, I think that's the thing to really hit on.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, that's you know people always have it in the back of their mind, and yeah, it's usually driven by the CEO or a product person. Now, I got to be careful
yeah,
because I could go on a rant because I have really strong
exactly.
opinions about this type of stuff.
Yep.
Because like I feel like we should just, I'm not saying don't worry about your competitors, but like when it comes to this, I don't think that you need to worry that much about your competitors. For
Yeah.
starters, competitors are going to see your product, whether you hide everything or not. If you're in a competitive market, whether it's a little cutthroat or a lot of cutthroat, like they're going to see or chop you. They're going to find out about your product. There's no escaping it.
Yeah.
I People need to focus on their buyers. They need to focus
Yeah.
on their future customers. And
Mm-hmm.
the value of focusing on them and enabling them in the buyer's journey far outweighs the potential, just the potential, right? It just sits in the back of their mind. It probably isn't even actually going to happen, but just the
Yeah.
potential for a competitor to steal product features, right?
Yeah.
And plus it's not like you're showing them how it's built, right? You're showing them
Right.
how it
Yeah.
works, right? Like take the
Oh,
the, au-
exactly.
the auto industry, right? You're very familiar with the auto industry.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
it's kind of
Uh-huh.
like test driving a car, right?
Yep.
If the competitor test drove every car on your lot, if Ford goes over to the Chevy lot and
Yeah.
test drives every single one of their cars, they would get a really good understanding of how smooth it was, how
Right.
well it brakes, or how safe it felt. But like
Yep.
they're not going to know how they built that,
Right.
right? They still have to figure all that
Oh,
out.
yeah.
And that's
Well,
the
I mean,
I just
dad, to what you're saying. I mean, like, you think that some of your current customers, I mean, the churn exists, right? It's a real thing. So you don't think some of your current customers have then moved over to another product and they've like shown videos or looms of like their experiences and like the problems maybe they're having, or
yeah
those things are out on YouTube, or even someone posts a video of how great your product is and they say that this is amazing. I love like blah 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 blah, right? And like influencers do this all the time. I've done it for multiple different products,
yeah
and I'll say like, "Hey, I wanted to share something in my community. This is pretty cool. Check it out. Here's kind of how it works." Right? Boom.
yep
Whoops. Now your product's out in
yeah
the open. Sorry. So it's like
yeah
there's not really. I mean, trying to control that is really not going to do too much. It's kind of like pricing too. Everyone figures it out eventually. You
yeah
just gotta.
and,
All you got to do is like go to the customer logos on your website, go to LinkedIn, and write the people and be like, "All right, did you
yeah
get a good deal on this? Like, what was the deal here?"
yeah
So
it's just the human mind. We fixate so much on the threats, right? And you hear all these investors and you hear the whole world talking about it, like focus on your customers, focus on your product, don't
right,
focus on your competitors. Everyone says it,
exactly.
but then at the end of the day, deep down, everyone psychologically still wants to focus on the threats, and the threats are always the competition, right? And so
Yep.
they just let that tiny little thing fester, and as a
Hmm.
result, they're anti showing their product, whether that's a
Yeah.
little or a lot.
Yeah.
And if we can just get past that and be confident that this is so much more beneficial for the buyers, for the future customers of my business, then yeah, let the competitors do their thing, right? Let
Yeah.
them think about us while we're thinking about the future, while we're thinking about what our buyers want, what our customers
Right.
want.
Hmm.
That's the way to do it. And I think people just it's again, it's they feel like it's risky. They feel
No,
like it's
I
just
agree.
yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, I got to pull back to one though, because I think it's important. Because VPs of marketing, especially if they're listening to this, or any director of marketing, because obviously this is your audience, but they might be worried, like what I said earlier about demos maybe going down. So like, oh well, we know we've got this trusted metric. I've got to deliver 50, the next month. If I don't, man, like my boss is going to be killing me. CEO's going to be pissed. So like, is there sometimes a lull that folks might experience from some of the clients you've worked with, where maybe demos go down initially, but the quality goes up, conversion rates go up, so that's good. Or do you see generally just demos actually just going up as you're giving more information about the product? And maybe this happens over the course of a few months, right? It's not like an instantaneous on switch, right? But you're doing better, education. Maybe you're using tours, like the Tourial, like linking it in a paid ad or organic or something like that. To your point, but should people be worried about that? I mean, is that a valid concern? Like demos going down because you've now shown your product on your website?
Uh, that that to me seems pretty crazy.
Uh-huh.
No, we haven't. I mean, I think that honestly, the short answer is no. Um, Again, you're giving buyers what they want, right? And what they want is to see the product. They're
Mm-hmm.
going to convert more. If you have, very few companies have the problem of too much inbound, too many conversions, right? Where it's
Yep.
just like, we got to figure out a way to disqualify these people. Great. Okay.
Yep.
If that's the case, if that's you, great. That's
Right.
not the case for most people,
Yep.
right? So I think it's really important to kind of distinct between that and understand like, yeah, if you use these self-guided demos, these tours, it's going to boost the amount of interest in your product, which leads to
Mm-hmm.
more conversions, leads to more demos. So no, we haven't experienced any sort of scenario where people are like, oh, my demos are down as a result of this, whether there's more quality demos coming in or not, I don't think
Right.
is actually the case. Yeah, we haven't really seen that
Yeah.
at all,
No,
to be
I like
completely
that. No,
honest.
I think that's good. And I mean, I would say the same thing to these people. I mean, it's the same conversations I have all the time. It's like, hey, listen, like at the end of the day, your goal is to make it ridiculously easy for this person to understand what you do in the shortest amount of time possible. And also, especially with a product, help them play around with it, do something with it, tell a story actually within the product, not just this feature does that and that feature does that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about
Hmm.
creating a narrative with inside this whole thing so that people can experience like, okay, like, and I assume you can probably just even ask this, maybe a little out of turn, but I assume you can create like all sorts of narratives, right? So you could create narratives by persona with
Yeah,
tutorials, right?
yeah.
So you could say, hey, like customer success, kind of here's like your little path and
Hmm.
so on
Hmm.
and so forth, because some companies have different personas, right? So it's like, well, I want to have maybe multiple narratives. So you could send them
Hmm.
down a couple different paths, right?
Yeah, yep. You absolutely can do that.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I think that's kind of another thing that it's a little bit more challenging to do with video, right? Is kind of when somebody's watching a video, and if I'm this persona, I need to skip to this part of the video, or the video is so one to many.
Yep.
Whereas, yeah, that's the beauty of creating more of the self-guided demo
Yep.
aspect, is that you can make it interactive and you can make it like a choose your adventure style, choose your persona, choose your problem, choose the feature that you're most interested in, and
Yep.
really dig into that more and explore and find out, more about the product that way. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's to me at this point, it's very simple, but again, like it's a large change in the way people think about showing their
Yeah.
product, right? And I understand that it's hard, it's hard to think in that way, but like if we can actually turn on the empathy switch and just be like, well, as a buyer, what would I want? And then
Exactly. Well
translate
said.
that into
Yeah.
your marketing. It's funny. It's a lot easier said than done. And I guess we humans are kind of weird in that way, where it's like, I want everything to be self-serve. I want everything,
Yep.
at my fingertips. But then I go and set up marketing for my company and I do the complete opposite, right?
Right.
Because I
Yep.
want all the information. I want to do all these other things that are the opposite of self-serve, because that's just what I know and that's what seems to be the easiest. So
Yeah.
it's very interesting, but yes, it's a big shift, but it's the right shift. It's the right
I,
mindset shift.
I think that's an awesome point to end on. I think what you said is imagine, I mean, even like secret shop your own buying experience. I mean, go
Yeah,
through it yourself and see how it feels, right? It's like,
yeah,
what
yeah.
experience do you want? Like, let's just imagine for a second that you've never bought, your brand or gone through the whole process or whatever. Sit down and like go through each little step. Talk to the SDR, talk to whoever. You can do Proton email, and you can go in with a fake email and all sorts of things like that, and see if that's an experience you want. And I think asking them that question too, because it's one thing to say like, "Hey, you need this. Hey, reduce friction, all this other stuff," but just take for a second the experience that your buyer's going through, and would you want that experience?
Yeah,
And if the answer is yes, well, then maybe all's lost, and you probably should move on.
yeah,
but
yeah,
uh, but most of the times the answer is going to be like, no, no, yeah, you're right. It's kind of annoying. Yeah, you're right, man. I
yeah.
didn't realize that. And especially when you're the CEO or the product owner, sometimes you're not going through that journey all the time yourself. You're just kind of like neck deep into either running the business or creating new product features or whatever it may be. So I think that's a good note for anyone listening, is that what Andy's saying is really focus on getting them to position themselves on how the buyer actually thinks versus, kind of forcing the idea down their throat. Just get them to start thinking about what the experience they want to have, or go through the experience themselves on their own website. And that's going to trigger, I think, a really great response where they're going to say, hey, we actually need to do something about this, whether it's through Tourial, self-guided tours, or through other things like transparent pricing and all the other things we talked about in this. So I don't know if you have anything to that, but I think that's an awesome point you just made.
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to be really hard, internally, to self-evaluate and self-criticize your own creation. I think it's really hard to do, but the most valuable thing is to like use your network, find
Hmm.
relatively unbiased people to test out your buyer's journey, test out your website. Um, I was listening to a community webinar a while ago, Peak. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they were just taking volunteers for people to kind of critique their website,
Hmm.
and they would put it up on the screen and I can't remember his name, but he would just
Rip.
absolutely bash it, rip it to pieces, right? An unbiased party saying, why are you saying this? What the heck do you do? Just like all the stuff that's wrong. And like a CEO, a head of marketing, it's really hard to, to call your baby ugly, right? It's very, very difficult. And there's a lot of emotion there. So if you can, take that hat off, give it to someone else to critique your website, to critique your buyer's journey, your process, all that stuff, it's always going to be more beneficial to lean on
I like that idea.
Your network.
Either way, they're going to need to be open, but I think it's an awesome idea. I think that, if you've got some other people, because then it's like, okay, at least like they're not fooling the process. And they'll probably point out things also too that you may have not even noticed, right? Because you were the one who designed the process. So you're going to be like, oh, well, this is the reason it did. But then to your point, someone else doesn't understand why you did what you did.
Yeah. So, it's just like designing a product and training people on a product. Like, you know exactly where everything is in your product. And so it's easy to you. And it's really hard to identify UX flaws because you just know where everything is, right? And you have to do those unbiased, user testing experiments. It's the same thing with marketing and the buyer's journey, right? You know exactly how your buyer's journey works. So to you, it's easy. To you, it seems simple. But like to the average person, it could be incredibly complex when you think it's very simple. And so getting that outside perspective is very important.
Agreed. Love it, man. Well, then, for those interested in checking out Tourial, it's just Tourial, Tour, and then IAL.com. So definitely check out those guys. You can actually take a Tourial, which just is perfect for me because you guys are just eating your own dog food. So you guys can actually take the tour yourself. It's the first CTA on their website. So definitely check them out. And then,
or if you do a brand search for Tourial, you'll probably see an ad that's run by Omni Lab.
Say what? What is that? Not us. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, hopefully in LinkedIn too. So hopefully some good stuff. But well, sweet, man. Well, then until next time, I think we're talking later this week. But it's awesome having you on.
Sounds good, man. I appreciate it. Take care.
Cool. Cheers, man.
All right, later.